All right, recording. Perfect. Okay, so right now, everyone, I have the setting on allow everybody to unmute themselves. So if you guys can all keep yourselves muted due to background noise until we get to the point of questions. And then feel free to unmute yourself because we only have, 10 of you right now on. So we should be able to facilitate questions, as we're going through everything. So basically today, we shouldn't go more than probably about 45 minutes tops. We have Rachel Jacobson on, and she is from ASAP, and she's going to kind of talk to you guys a little bit about the organization, which you should have seen their website already and perused the guide for the living principles. And then she's going to talk a little bit in terms of the project and what it would entail. This is more of a higher level, big picture. We're going to get into the weeds as we go on in the next couple weeks and really divide up into specific tasks for the two project teams. So with that, Rachel, I'm going to hand it over to you. Hopefully everybody can hear me well. And let me know if you need help with sharing screen or you got it. Oh, you're perfect. You got it yourself.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Krista. Can you hear me okay?
Definitely.
Okay, great. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for having me in today. My name is Rachel Jacobson. I'm the Senior Program Manager at the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. I'm really excited to be talking to you today about the organization. My understanding of this course is that many of you either already are climate adaptation professionals or are on the course to be climate adaptation professionals. So I hope that in addition to being engaged in this project, that this will inspire you to join our network if you haven't already. And so in addition to, of course, being the point person for the student project on the Living Guide, which I'll get into, you're also welcome to reach out to me at any time if you would like to know more information generally about ASAP. All right, so just a little overview of what we'll cover today. Introductions. I think, Krista, we talked about doing introductions with all the students, right?
Yep, we can definitely do that.
Okay, perfect. And then I'll do an ASAP overview, and then I will get a little bit more in depth on the Living Guide to the Principles of Climate Change Adaptation, kind of the structure, how it came about, and what we've done with it so far. And then I'll jump into what the motivation was for this student project and kind of the vision for the project and the objectives and what we hope you'll get out of it as well. So yeah, with that, should we go around the room?
Yeah, let's go around and I'll call out everybody's name and maybe you can just unmute yourself and introduce yourself to Rachel. I'm just going to go by my list. I don't know if it's the same with everybody else's participant list, but let's start with Antone.
Hi, everybody. I'm Antone. In this class, I've taken a good bit of other climate science classes through my undergrad. Currently working for a small land conservation organization with a bunch of coastal properties, and currently work with local town government to help plan some climate resilience actions going forward, and a little bit of everything else.
Cool. Nice to meet you.
Perfect. Next, I've got Eric.
Hello. Hi, I'm Eric Nielsen from Walpole, New Hampshire. This is my second semester at Antioch. I'm currently working with Michael Simpson and two other Antioch students on a kind of climate research paper regarding the impacts of Hurricane Irene on Vermont communities. I'm unsure of where I want my career path to go, but I know that I want it to either be centered around sustainable development, climate mitigation, or climate adaptation.
Great.
Great. Flick.
Hi, my name's Flick. My background is in campaigning. I'm doing advocacy as part of the environmental studies program at Antioch. Yeah, my experience is in campaigning against fracking and extraction, not really in resilience. So this is a new area for me, so really excited. Nice to meet you.
Awesome.
Perfect. Gabriel.
Hello, I'm Gabriel. I'm from Poughkeepsie, New York. This is my second semester at Antioch, and my second semester doing anything environmental science. I have a bachelor's degree in theater, but a class like this is why I'm here. My concentration is sustainable development and climate change, so learning resiliency, adaptation, and groups like ASAP is kind of what I'm here to learn. So,
Cool. Great. Megan.
Good afternoon. I'm Megan Sylvia. It's my first semester. I'm in resource management and conservation. I'm currently working in construction, environmental management, and sustainability. And I apologize, I'm in a really loud cafe right now.
That's okay. Don't worry about it. Morgan.
Hello. This isn't like my video is working. But my name's Morgan Urquia, and I live in Alstead, New Hampshire, and I currently work for a wilderness education school that's based on a farm here in Marlow. And I'm a teacher of adventure sports in addition to earth skills and wild crafts. And so I enjoy working in education around environmental education, but I'd like to shift to more working with diverse communities and understanding more of community rehabilitation and building community resilience.
Great.
Perfect. Olivia.
Hello, I'm Olivia. Previous to this degree, I was working in public water in Maine, and now I'm interested in pursuing civic ecology and community resilience, specifically like downtown revitalization.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited to get started.
Perfect. Raleigh.
I'm Raleigh. I'm a second semester in the Sustainable Development and Climate Change course concentration. My background is in sociology and social justice and awareness, and I'm excited to learn more of the tool set for resilience and the sciencey sides of things.
Great. Susanna.
Hi. I am from Rhode Island, and I am a first semester, very new to environmental studies. My background is in studio art. Currently, I've been working with a landscape company that specializes in coastal restoration projects, so it's kind of really amazing. I love it, and I really like to focus on how to connect communities, specifically communications, with climate change discussion. Yeah, very excited about this particular project. Very good. Thanks.
Perfect. Ginny.
Hi, I'm Ginny. I'm from Somers, Connecticut, and I'm in the Sustainable Development Climate Change concentration. I'm in my third semester, and I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer, and I'm hoping to go back to my community and continue working with them with conservation farming and tree planting. And so thank you for coming and giving this presentation.
Great. And then last we have Adam, who I think is on unmute, hopefully. Let's see. Yep.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Oh, we can hear you. Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to figure it out. I'm actually not home yet. I'm on my phone trying to make this work. I have to apologize. Are we doing introductions?
Yes, just quick, Adam.
Okay.
Introduce yourself and where you're from.
Perfect. So my name is Adam. Thank you for speaking tonight and meeting with us. I live in Western Massachusetts, and right now I am a full-time father of my 2 young daughters, and I'm doing some side work, but my primary focus going forward in getting out of this program is to do some work with some local land trusts. And I'm open to a lot more avenues, but that's my focus, is to diversify my skill sets and figure out how we can best conserve land.
Perfect. So that's it for now, Rachel. We have at least one person that's missing. So, but I'm recording this so that they can see this afterwards. So I think we can move on to the next item on the agenda.
Okay, sounds good. Well, it's really great to hear about all of your backgrounds. I love the diversity that's represented in this group. With the Living Guide, you know, it really is meant to apply in all sectors, all geographies, really any context. So I think it's such a strength of the group that the group is so diverse. So we can really, you know, we've tested that hypothesis in a few places, and I think testing it with this group in more of a learning context will be really valuable. Oh, just so you guys know, I'm based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'm from Southeastern Michigan. And a ton of things in your backgrounds really resonates with mine as well. Education, I come from a policy background, and of course, excited to explore kind of many different elements of climate adaptation with all of you. All right, so let's move on to a little overview of ASAP. So the American Society of Adaptation Professionals, we're really the only professional association that's dedicated to climate change adaptation and resilience. And we've been around for a few years now. We were first a program, part of the Institute for Sustainable Communities, which is a nonprofit based in Vermont. So we have some New England roots. And then we recently, in December of 2017, spun off into our own 501c3. And so here we are now as a small nonprofit professional association. And we have a network that you can see on the slide if you are looking at your computer. Our network spans all across the US. We also have members in Canada, and we have members in other countries scattered around the globe as well. We consider ourselves primarily a North American network, and we definitely have membership that's really diverse across that whole geography. And our network, as you can also see on the slide, really spans all sectors and scales. And I think that's partially because, you know, so our mission is to connect and support climate change adaptation professionals to advance innovation excellence in the field. And we define a climate adaptation professional as anyone who's considering projections about future climate conditions in their day-to-day work. And so that includes a whole range of people, again, with a lot of that diversity represented right here in this group. You know, we have everyone from community organizers to planners to folks in conservation and natural resources, people working in the public sector, the private sector, in academia, in nonprofits. And so, you know, our network really does reflect the diversity of sectors, scales, and geographies that the problem of climate change and the need for climate adaptation affects. So just a little bit about kind of our role in the field of climate adaptation and our organizational structure. So we consider ourselves what we call an intermediary organization. And this is an organization that really connects all of the other people and organizations together to advance collaboration, provide incentives for collaboration and infrastructure for collaboration to really pursue a systems change, basically systems change objectives that can only be achieved on a really large scale. And so we believe that that intermediary function is really important in bringing people together, really leveraging what everyone in the field is doing, making sure that we're connected and we're collaborating wherever possible. So that's kind of our role as an intermediary organization. And some other roles in the field that, of course, many other actors play, practitioners, practitioner organizations or service providers, funders, policymakers, that sorts of things. So our network touches all of those types of actors, and it's our role to bring them all together. And then our organizational structure, as I mentioned, we consider ourselves a professional association, but one which is network-centric. And our network and our people are really at the heart of everything we do. And our approach to the systems change work that we do is, you know, that it's based upon relationships and it's based on connections between people first and foremost. And so that's our network-centric approach. And on an exciting note, we are currently hiring for a network manager. So this being a group of students and folks connected to a higher ed institution, we're always on the lookout for great candidates. That position is closing at the end of this week. So thinking about our mission, the strong network that we have, and our organizational structure, we do this sort of connecting and supporting this system change, this moving along advancement and innovation in the field through 4 what we call capacity building program areas. Because everything we do is centered on our network and the people in our network, one of our primary objectives is to build the capacity of the people in our network to do good work. And so we do that through these 4 areas, which some of you can see listed here on the screen. And so that we call those ASAP Connects, ASAP Serves, Adaptation Voices, and Adaptation Careers. So in ASAP Connects, it's all about helping members find and interact with one another through things like our virtual member-led interest groups, our ASAP hubs, are bringing people together at national and regional conferences, and oftentimes it really comes down to just making one-to-one connections. I can't tell you how many one-to-one connections I make daily between members and the organizations that they represent. With ASAP Serves, this is all about giving members the opportunity to give back to the field of climate change adaptation, and in so doing, of course, grow their professional skills. And so we have several programs and opportunities for people to do essentially professional service through our organization. Adaptation Voices is all about sharing and building up and leveraging the stories of all of the great work that our members are doing in the field, and making sure that we're really providing real, just excellent outlets for people to share that information and to tell their stories, and for us to really amplify that. And then finally, Adaptation Careers. This is both about making sure that members can excel in their current jobs as well as find new jobs, and really define and understand what it means to work in the field of climate adaptation, which of course is a field that is growing and changing all the time. And I know that you all have been exposed to the Rising to the Challenge Together report, so I wanted to just highlight, you may or may not have seen, there are many, many appendices to that report, and one of the appendices is specifically focused on climate adaptation professional associations. I'm not sure why they had made that plural. It was basically a list of recommendations for ASAP. And many of those we're already really strongly working on, and many of them we've taken up the mantle on. I didn't list all of them here, but I list some of the ones that I personally think are the most valuable and important, and really speak to the work that ASAP is doing well or working really hard on right now. So I won't go through all of them. You can, of course, take a look at these slides at your leisure, but I did highlight 3 which I think are really germane to the project that we're going to be doing together. So fostering community, shared values, and common purpose, fostering a shared identity as adaptation professionals, and then regularly reviewing, evaluating, and updating professional skills and standards. So all of those are really central to the purpose of the Living Guide, and then the Living Guide Student Project is a lot of how we make good on those recommendations. So really, oh, hold on, getting a message from Zoom. Okay, excited to be working on that with all of you. In thinking about how ASAP specifically is building the field, and hopefully you're all really jazzed about climate adaptation field building after reading Rising to the Challenge Together, I just wanted to highlight 3 projects that we're really deep into right now that kind of, I think, showcase our field building role. So you can see the 3 of them listed on this slide. We have the Climate Adaptation Service Registry, Adaptation Knowledge Portal Interoperability, and then an Adaptation Knowledge and Competencies Framework. So first is the Adaptation Service Registry. So this is kind of like, you can think of it as sort of like the Yelp for climate adaptation, and it's all about connecting climate adaptation service providers and service seekers. And so it's an opportunity for service providers to submit information about what services they provide and where, and how they demonstrate that those services really are quality services that sort of meet the expectations as set forth in ASAP's professional guidance resources, which we will talk about in just a minute. And then there's a user interface for service seekers to access that information and choose among the service providers that are out there. Right now, we see that the adaptation service marketplace is really exploding, but service seekers, you know, they don't really know what's out there. They don't necessarily know how to access it, and they certainly don't often know how to evaluate the quality of those services. So this is a project that seeks to address that need. Then we have knowledge portal interoperability. And if you haven't yet been exposed to all of the many adaptation and knowledge portals that are out there, I'm sure that Krista will be guiding you through that in some way or another through this course. There are many, the Climate Resilience Toolkit, the Climate Adaptation Knowledge Exchange, the Georgetown Climate Center, Adaptation Clearinghouse, and those are all really excellent resources in and of themselves, but we know and believe in the field that they would be stronger and better if users had a more seamless experience between all of those knowledge portals. And we see that as a really critical need in the field, and is a project that we're actively working on with our partners who run those knowledge portals. Finally, the Adaptation Knowledge and Competencies Framework. So we run a member advisory group on professional education, which is a group of climate adaptation and professional education experts, as well as interested ASAP members. And they're working together to define needs and gaps in the professional education space, as well as address some of those needs and gaps. And one of the deliverables that that group is working on is this knowledge and competencies framework. And so, you know, as I mentioned before, and as I'm sure you're aware, the field being so young and new and developing, there isn't a standard out there for when people are being educated on climate adaptation. You know, what are the knowledge and competencies that they have to gain? There are many amazing programs out there, which are certainly quality programs, Antioch's being probably one of the, you know, definitely one of the leaders in that group, but not a lot of coordination between them and standards that everyone is following. So this group and this deliverable are kind of the first steps to address that. So I'm going to move into the Living Guide itself now. And Krista, would this be a good time to just pause and see if anyone has questions about ASAP?
Yeah, I think any general questions about the organization, if that are on somebody's mind, feel free to chime in and ask now. I think you're going to get more questions on the Living Guide.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. Okay, well, let's move on to that. We've got the Living Guide to the Principles of Climate Change Adaptation. Krista tells me that you've read it, which is great. And I'm going to walk you through kind of the impetus behind it and the structure and all of that. And so, yeah, I mean, there are really a lot at, as I'm sure Krista has talked about, or you've realized yourself, there's, you know, there are a lot of toolkits out there. There's a lot of like how to on, you know, climate adaptation actions, but they focus on really what work to do, not necessarily how to do that work. And so the Living Guide really addresses that, you know, what are the characteristics, what are the principles, what are the values that we want underscoring the climate adaptation work that's being done, regardless of the nature of that work, regardless of what sector it's in, regardless of what phase in the climate adaptation planning or action process it's in. And, you know, I wanted to put this slide in here up front to just talk about the purpose of the student project, but we'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. So you can be thinking about this as I'm talking about the Living Guide. So the Living Guide, as its name suggests, it's living. And when we first created the guide, we made a promise to our membership that it would remain alive and that we would continue to update it and ensure that it was remaining consistent with current research and practice. But this is one of our first opportunities since we've, I mean, probably our last real change to the guide was made in very, very early of 2018. So it's been, you know, probably a year since we've changed anything in the guide, and that is long enough. So we're really excited to be able to work with all of you to make sure that we're living up to that promise, that the Living Guide remains living. And then, of course, you know, a lot of people comment on how succinct the content is and how valuable it is to have that succinct content, and we will maintain a version of the guide that includes just that core content. But many people also, you know, want to have expanded content. And so this, you know, this opportunity to expand and illuminate what's already there to really enhance the experience of the user is a core objective of this project as well. And then we apply the Living Guide in many different contexts. And so this project will be an opportunity for us to make sure that those applications are really sound and that they are addressing the needs of the adaptation professionals that we're reaching. And so excited to kind of talk about what that looks like as well. All right. So, you know, of course, in ASAP's, in fulfilling our mission around advancing excellence and innovation in the field, part of that is bringing consistency to the guidance and education that climate adaptation professionals receive. And the two documents that really underscore all of that work for us are the Living Guide as well as our Code of Ethics. And I believe, Krista, did you direct folks to the URL that had both links on it so that folks could look at the Code of Ethics as well?
I don't think they were able to see the Code of Ethics. I think they just were able to see the Google Doc link for the guide itself.
Okay, I'll make sure you have that URL too, so that folks can look at the Code of Ethics kind of in tandem as you're getting up to speed and getting ready to start the project.
Great.
Yeah. And, you know, basically with the Living Guide, you know, right now, service providers, practitioners, policymakers, funders, businesses, they all use their own language and their own way of describing standards and values for approaching climate change adaptation. And we believe that it's really critical to be able to articulate these things in a consistent way, and that we have desired outcomes and desired approaches that the whole field can get behind. And in order for the whole field to be able to get behind them, they have to be broad enough and flexible enough to apply to all sectors and scales. So that's what we've tried to do with the Living Guide. And just a note on kind of the difference between the Living Guide and the Code of Ethics. The Living Guide is really, it's a synthesis of both existing and aspirational principles that are articulated in a large set of field-spanning literature, both white literature and gray literature. It's a living document, as I've mentioned a few times, that all ASAP members have had the opportunity to see, to contribute to provide feedback on, and they continue to have that opportunity. The Code of Ethics, on the other hand, is really a static professional ethics document that we expect all adaptation professionals will sign on to and will sort of take as a given that this is how you behave ethically in this field. So that's kind of the difference between the two, but they're both really important as foundational resources that underscore all of, you know, much of the work that we do, especially with professional capacity building. Okay, so again, we wanted these principles to be as we purposely designed them to be broad so they could be applied in any context. And they're, again, both aspirational and existing. So we want them to describe how adaptation is currently practiced, but also articulate a vision about how climate adaptation could or should be practiced in order for it to be most equitable, ethical, and effective. So the Living Guide, as I'm sure you noticed, it contains 4 sections. So we have an introduction, desired outcomes, values, beliefs, strategies, and approaches. That's one section. and then categories of action. And so what you see on the screen right now is a little distillation of our introduction. And we describe in that introduction really the importance of taking action and the relationship between power and decision making, and then the responsibility of adaptation professionals to take and facilitate actions that build power for traditionally underrepresented populations. And we have gotten some interesting feedback on that introduction. Some folks love it and some folks hate it. And we put it in that aspirational category of, this is where we feel much of our membership is centered and where we want to move our membership towards if they're not already centered there. So we've opted to keep it. So that's the intro. And then with desired outcomes, these are the core outcomes that ASAP believes should be the focus of adaptation work. We wanted to really include them towards the beginning of the document, because we think there's a lot of value in kind of knowing where you're headed before figuring out the best way to get there. And it helps us stay focused on our end goals. I think what's important is that, and this has come up a few times, these outcomes are, or the Living Guide as a whole is a description of what we hope the practice of adaptation by trained professionals will lead to. These outcomes are related to, but they're not the same as the adaptation-focused outcomes of a particular location or organization or sector. So these are broad, they can be applied to any context, and then we expect that any adaptation professional working on a specific project, they'll have their own project outcomes. So these are more outcomes for, how does our work collectively, what is our work collectively leading to? And I think that, I would say, just in turn, and I'm sure that Krista is setting you up beautifully to really understand adaptive capacity and exposure and sensitivity. And I think that those are really good buckets of things to start to grasp when you're first approaching climate adaptation work. So next we have the values, beliefs, strategies, and approaches. And we often we say that these are sort of the principles. In a lot of, oftentimes when we talk about the principles, we're talking about this list of values, beliefs, strategies, and approaches. And these are really like tried and true strategies for doing adaptation work, which is effective, ethical, and equitable. This is kind of the brass tacks and what it comes down to. We often find that adaptation professionals, recognize most, if not all of these strategies in their own work, and that's a good thing. We see that as a good thing. That means that our Living Guide is really reflecting practice as it exists. And, we expect that if you're out there doing adaptation work, that you're using many of these strategies all at once, and they're all interrelated. And we try to really pull out like what we think is unique to adaptation and then group together things like best practices for communications and engagement, which can apply in adaptation and applies in many other fields as well. I think, and then one thing, once you do have a chance to take a look at that code of ethics, you'll see there's a ton of overlap here with the code of ethics. But just in the Living Guide, we really articulate it in more of kind of like an action-oriented way, because it's all about how you apply these strategies and approaches and values and beliefs. And then finally, we have our categories of action. And we try, as I'm sure you saw, we try to really illuminate the categories of action with examples. And this is going to be a big focus of the project as well, is to really expand on what those examples look like and how we articulate them. One thing that I think is really important to note with the categories of action is some people confuse the Living Guide as being a synthesis of adaptation processes, especially when they take a look at the categories of action. And that's definitely not our intention. We didn't synthesize adaptation planning process documents when we developed the Living Guide. That would have been a totally different exercise. You know, these are simply categories of action and that practitioners may take, and depending on what kind of adaptation professional you are, you may be focusing on 1 or 2 or 3 of these categories of action and never really touching some of the other ones. And so no, we're not saying that everyone needs to do all of these, but rather, this is what describes what adaptation looks like on the ground. Okay, yeah, so I think, Krista, have I covered everything that you hoped in terms of kind of the structure and the motivation and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think that's a great overview because it kind of gives the context coming from you guys' point of view, which I don't think I could give as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, I guess the one thing I would add is that we did have a whole series of, so we continue to, have the Living Guide on our website, and as you saw, there's like a feedback mechanism built in there that folks can send in their comments. And then we did do a whole series of focus groups before we published the first version of the guide. And so we have a lot of information from that as well about just how people were thinking about this and how it resonates. And each time we do applications of the guide, primarily in our workshops, we kind of gain more and more of that feedback. So should we stop for questions here about the guide before we talk about the project, or just move on and take everything at the end?
Maybe we can move on, take everything at the end, and we can, and people can, because some of the questions might be kind of together.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so this is the slide that you already saw, and this is really our core objectives for the student project. We want to make sure that the Living Guide is remaining consistent with current research and practice, that it's truly a living guide. This, as I mentioned, basically like late 2017, early 2018 is the last time we did any updates, and at that time it wasn't even substantive updates at that point, so it was really late 2017. And in that time, there has been field-spanning literature that's come out that we want to make sure gets integrated here. I'm sure there's been, maybe not transformational, but certainly incremental changes in how people are thinking about climate adaptation. We need to make sure that that's reflected in the guide, and that will be a big objective of the student project. And then again, expanding and illuminating the content so that the users who really do want to go more in depth on the items that are in the guide will have that opportunity. And finally, making sure that the applications, that the places where we're applying the Living Guide are really optimized for people's experiences. And I'll just note, I think that this is such a great group to do that because, a lot of you are thinking a lot about your career and your professional development. And so, I think it's a great group to be able to kind of speak to what those needs are, because that's really often where we apply this, is in groups of folks who are, thinking about professional development, professional advancement. And then this is really my last slide, actually, just about, the opportunities that I think this student project brings, really, so you'll get just excited and jazzed about it. So I think it's really an opportunity to gain knowledge about, that whole suite of field-spanning literature and all the concepts that are in there. And I'm sure that you would get a lot of that through the course regardless, but just kind of being forced to really synthesize that in a product that's going to be used by your fellow professionals. I think that's a pretty unique opportunity. And then I really hope that this will be an opportunity for folks to reflect on your own practice and your own research as it relates to what's in the Living Guide. I find myself doing that. And I hope that everyone who's exposed to the guide does that. And since you'll be working with it in such an intimate way, I hope that you'll take that opportunity. It looks like I did not end that sentence, but think critically about what adaptation professionals need to succeed in their jobs and advance their careers. As you saw on one of my previous slides, that's really the goal of our Adaptation Careers program and a lot of our professional capacity building work. And we'll think of all of you as kind of thought partners in that work while we're doing this project together. And then really gain exposure to a lot of the amazing adaptation work that's happening out there in the field and in our network, and the professionals who are, the individuals who are doing that work and organizations that are doing that work. So I think it'll be really a great opportunity to get that kind of bird's eye view of the field, as well as kind of exposure to specific projects and case studies, and then most importantly, bringing it back to ASAP, the people, because that's what we're all about.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, thank you, Rachel. So if you are in a quiet place, feel free to just unmute yourself if you have a question you want to ask. If it's really loud where you are, you can also just write it in the chat box. And this is a lot of information also to just kind of take in and think about. So I'm sure questions will come up before we even meet in the February weekend. So you can always email me a question or thoughts that you're having. But this is a good time if you took a look at the guide, any questions you might have about it, or questions about the project, or anything that we've talked about so far. And we haven't gotten into the weeds yet, but getting there. Because this is obviously, just as it's a living guide, it's a living project. So there's things that we're going to be learning along the way and adjusting as we move forward. So let me see. Any questions? Oh, we have some. Yes, questions in the weeds. That's going to be expected. And I have put out, Rachel, for them to see a draft of kind of how we're envisioning the project to go in terms of, splitting everybody up into 2 teams and the kind of objectives that they have. That's also going to be for you guys the next step to really kind of look at that the project guidelines with the objectives for each of the teams, and thinking about in the next week or two, if you think that also, I really value the students' opinion as well and the folks in the class, like if you feel like, okay, we've got it, or if you see something that you think is missing to achieve what we've been talking about here, that would be really important to hear from you guys. Now that you heard from Rachel, and now you can go back and kind of take a look at that for the 2 student teams. If you think, yeah, I think that's going to help us get to where we wanted to go by the end of the course. So think about that too as you walk away from this Zoom meeting.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Great. So first, thank you, Rachel, for letting us have this opportunity. This kind of work where we're able to build like professional kind of personal skill sets while kind of putting out what could be important literature is a good way to learn. So thank you for this opportunity. I was drawn towards, I don't know if the layout for you, Rachel, is the same that how it is on our Sakai kind of webpage for our class, but for Team 2, it mentions selecting interview subjects and conducting interviews. And I'm sure that as kind of how the guide is, there isn't really a set in stone way to do sort of like this research. But I was wondering if this is going to be kind of more of a national look at climate adaptation in terms of the interview subjects, or as kind of some of my past work has been more focused towards some of the climate projections and climate work being done in the area where our university is located.
Yeah, thanks so much for your question, Eric. So I would say we definitely skew towards national. And I think that for us, an ideal set of interview subjects would essentially be as diverse as possible, covering, different geographic regions as well as different sectors. I think that certainly if there are potential interview subjects with whom you already have a connection, or you're really interested in a project that's happening in your region, I think there would certainly be opportunity to consider, that person or project as a potential subject here. But ultimately, we'll want to get as diverse of a group as possible.
Okay. And then second one, I was browsing through your website, and Do you have any free trials for looking at some of the adaptation professionals or anything?
Yeah, so so we do have a student rate, which is $50 a year. So you would all be eligible for that. This is something that Krista and I have not yet discussed, but I think it is ripe for discussion. So let us get back to you about any additional opportunities we may have specifically for this group. But if anyone does feel like they want to go ahead with the student membership, and you have any questions about that, please feel free. And then we are going to be rolling out actually just like so right now we only have paid membership is kind of like our only entry point right now, but we are going to be rolling out a subscription service, which will be free. So that will be kind of like access to some of our really, really basic services. And that will definitely be coming online within the lifetime of this project. So regardless of where we land, you'll have that opportunity, which will be at no cost sometime within the next couple of months.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Eric. I see that Ginny had a quick question in the chat. She said, what are some of your strategies to reaching out and connecting with people who may need your services?
Great. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of how we connect to adaptation professionals and make sure that they can take advantage of our member benefits. So most members come to us by word of mouth and referrals from existing members. So, that is a big part of our membership recruitment strategy. We are also at a lot of regional and national conferences, so we do a lot of recruitment that way. And then we have a couple of programs which are specifically kind of designed to reach adaptation professionals or would-be adaptation professionals who may not know about our network otherwise. So one of those is called the Resilience Dialogues, and it's actually a service opportunity that we provide for our members to participate as subject matter experts in a virtual online dialogue. And then we have community leaders who participate as well. And many of those community leaders are actually like local officials who don't really have a lot of resources oftentimes it's like a lone city planner in a small town who, is really passionate about climate adaptation but doesn't have any support. And so that's, again, an example of a program that we have our hands in, which helps us reach, a broader network of folks. But yeah, we're always trying to improve our recruitment strategy, which is part of why we're moving to this no-cost subscription service, because we really, in addition to, we see it as kind of a two-step process. First, we want as many people as possible to identify as being adaptation professionals. And as I mentioned, we have that really broad definition of who that is, so that those people will know that there even are resources out there that they can take advantage of. And so that's kind of all part of our recruitment strategy, that identity piece being really important. And I would say, bringing it back to the living guide is a critical element of helping people identify as such, because if someone can read that document or part of that document and see themselves in it, that goes a long way to helping them identify and then become part of our network.
Great. Okay. Any more? I don't see any more in the chat. Any more questions? If anybody has a question, why don't you unmute yourself? If not, I think what I'm going to do is twofold. I'll send out a email to everybody just with the link to this recording for the folks that were not able to come on, and then also maybe I'll set up a discussion forum in the final project page for us all to be able to ask questions of each other or together too as we're moving forward. Me and Rachel still need to work out some of the administration pieces of this, like how we're going to communicate with ASAP, how we're going to communicate with Rachel and ask questions moving forward, and really trying to figure out if the timeline works, what we're thinking about doing, and when we're doing it. Again, I would be great for you guys all to deep dive into those objectives and kind of the bullet points in that and really digest them, thinking now it will probably make a lot more sense after hearing this, because I think it puts it all into context for you guys. And then maybe this week coming up, let's talk about, okay, what might be confusing, what seems to work. Like I said, what you guys are thinking in terms of your ideas. Does this meet the objectives we were talking about? And then we can start really thinking about how we'll communicate back and forth between ASAP and our team. And then we can also start looking at who is interested in working on what. So, you know, of those objectives we came up and the two teams, you know, where are you guys thinking you see yourself working? Because that'll help me too in terms of, does the group split up naturally and we just have two teams? Or, you know, is everybody really interested in one side of it and not the other? And then maybe we might reorganize a little bit so that we can still get everything done. So those are the key things I would say for everybody here to think about in the next week or so that we can actually start making progress that weekend in February, which is like 2 weekends away. It's coming up really fast. So, all right. Perfect. All right. Well, not seeing anything. Thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate you being able to take the time out to come and talk to us for this almost hour. That was really, I think, great in terms of, like I said, putting everything into context. And then we can, you and I can talk offline in the next, you know, in probably about a week after the students and I all talk, and, you know, the big questions that might come up, or if there's anything to brainstorm or think about before we actually get started.
Great. Yeah, it sounds good. It was really great to meet you all, and I'm looking forward to working together.
Great. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for taking time out at night to come to the Zoom presentation, and I will talk to you all very soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.